Welcome to the Weekly Dose Podcast, your one-stop shop for the weekly news in incretin mimetic therapies, with your host, ManOnMounjaro, Dave Knapp. Welcome to this week's edition of the Weekly Dose Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, ManOnMounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. That's why you're here. And we've got a great podcast lined up for you on this Tuesday, May 14th edition of the Weekly Dose. Thank you to our producer, Clark Kent, for helping to provide so much of the information that we'll cover today. But let's get into it. We're going to start today's podcast by talking about one of the main reasons that we do this podcast, the show on YouTube, all of the content that we create, and that's to create awareness and change the conversation around obesity and the stigma around these medications. And I just wanted to cover some interesting factoids. You can check out all of the links to all of the things we talk about in the show notes, as well as find more content from OnThePen. But check this out. This is a scientific analysis presented this week at the ECHO 2024, the European Congress on Obesity. And this is just some interesting facts on why it is so important that we as a society treat obesity as a disease and get this thing under control once and for all. People with a BMI of 30 to 35 were 36% more likely to be absent from work. People with a BMI of 35 to 40 were 61% more likely to have sick days. People with a BMI of 30 to 35 were 38% more likely to be off for more than a week. And people with a BMI of 35 to 40 were 52% more likely to be off work for more than a week. And people with a BMI of 40 plus were 121% more likely. So if we just talk about this strictly from an economic standpoint and a productivity standpoint, obesity is a drag on productivity. Of course, if you live with the disease of obesity, you know that we are more sick. We deal with more issues, comorbidities related to the disease. So it's time to treat it, and it's time to start talking seriously about obesity as a disease. And in sort of some complementary information, another Bloomberg article from this week, 1 in 8 adults have tried GLP-1 drugs in their fight against obesity or diabetes, and 50% of them are still taking them. About 4 in 10 on the drug have reported them taking them mainly to lose weight, so about 40%. And then just 1% of people over 65 said they've taken a GLP-1 for weight loss. This is why the U.S. Congress needs to pass the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, because that is the age population that would benefit so greatly from accessibility to these medications. We need to get Medicare covering these anti-obesity medications. And of course, we've seen some positive news in the world of Wegovy being added for heart failure. But for those of us who are looking to get on a GLP-1 to control the disease of obesity, we have got to advocate for the passage of the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act. And you can find more about that on the channel. Thanks to one of our viewers, RJ Cole, for sending me some email correspondence that he had with CVS Caremark to verify some of the news that we've been hearing rumblings about for weeks. But this is really big news. If you use CVS Caremark as a PBM, they will no longer be offering GLP-1 medications via their mail order pharmacy. This is a huge accessibility issue, because my fear is that it won't stop here. It won't stop with CVS Caremark. This is a huge issue that these pharmacies have to deal with these PBMs, especially. And it won't be long until the shortages cause such a drain on their resources that they'll just give it up as well. And so this is a huge, sort of unintended consequence of these shortages, and another reason to advocate for the Release the Vials campaign. Of course, along the lines of the shortages, we did see a non-update update to tirzepatide in terms of the shortage on the FDA website. They just confirmed everything, that the 2.5 is the only dose that will be available through the beginning of July. So a non-update update, so to speak, for tirzepatide on the FDA website this week. In some interesting NovoNordis news this week. So we saw Bernie Sanders sort of continue his push forward with NovoNordis investigation. You saw NovoNordis basically file and ask for more time to come up with the information that Mr. Sanders has requested and his committee has requested. Be interesting to see how they respond to that. But we also saw Senator Sanders write a column for a Danish newspaper called Politiken. And basically what he's doing in this article is he's urging the citizens of Denmark to put pressure on NovoNordis to reduce the cost of GLP-1 medications as part of their social responsibility to assist the U.S. with obesity and the diabetes problem. Now, I think this is an interesting play by Mr. Sanders. I mean, as we know, NovoNordis is the largest part of the Danish economy. And so it's rather interesting to see him sort of make a plea for them to, you know, sort of take a blow for the sake of the United States. I'm not sure how far he's going to get with that, but it's interesting to see him kind of working it from that angle. In more NovoNordis news, you see them engaging with their financial partners in the Netherlands to basically help it sell bonds, which are basically just a form of loans. And these loans are for the general operating expenses of the company, but also to help fund this $16 billion deal with Catalin. Now, we've sort of surmised on this program that the Catalin deal will have a really hard time getting done this year because the United States regulators really are kind of a monkey wrench in this process for NovoNordis because there's so much conflict of interest with other pharmaceutical companies. But basically, the sale of these bonds by NovoNordis would seem to be an indication that they expect this thing to get done, and they expect it to get done in soon enough time that they want to have the capital to go ahead and make that purchase. So this will be an interesting one to watch as we look to see if that Catalin acquisition actually becomes reality. Now, if you haven't followed this story, this would be a major deal for NovoNordis and a major blow to Eli Lilly, as Catalin is a manufacturer of generics, but they also help these drug companies manufacture their blockbuster injectable medication. So if that all goes under the sort of the NovoNordis umbrella, that would be detrimental to the supply chain of medicines like MOUNJARO and ZET Bound, and to a lesser extent, Trulicity. So that will be an interesting one to watch. Now, one of the things that came out this week, sort of shifting gears as it relates to slow responders on GLP-1s. Now, this is a fascinating one. It says that maybe people who are slow to respond to the earlier doses of these GLP-1s, specifically ZET Bound, as defined by reaching 5% weight loss, right? So the mean time to reach 5% weight loss for slow responders who went to achieve 5% or greater weight loss on the medication was 24.8 weeks. So it seems like there are some people dropping off before that who think that the medicine doesn't work. And the reality is that you need for a lot of people to get to the upper doses to see the level of weight loss that you're looking for. Now, some will never achieve the level of weight loss they're looking for with just these medications alone. They're simply a tool in the arsenal of fighting against the disease of obesity. But even today, I had somebody who was messaging me frustrated that they had plateaued after 3 weeks on the 2.5 milligram dose of ZET Bound. And I had to remind this person that if you lose anything on the 2.5 milligram dose of ZET Bound, you are playing with house money. It's not a therapeutic dose. It's just designed to get you used to the medication until you titrate up to the 5 milligram, which is the first technically therapeutic dose of the medicine. Now, do many people see therapeutic benefits from the medication on the 2.5 milligram? Of course they do. But like I said, you're sort of playing with house money if that's the case. The last little piece of news I wanted to get to this week is in the news of Viking Therapeutics. So we followed this VK2735, which is Viking Tide. It is basically an investigational GLP-1 GIP coagonist that is being tested not only in a once weekly injectable, but also in a daily oral formulation. this could be a game changer. The oral formulation of VK2735 could be an absolute game changer in incretin mimetic therapies, because what you would see is these, top tier injectable level weight loss potentially in a daily oral that is much easier to bring to market, doesn't require temperature control. Obviously, for some people who are averse to taking the injections, a pill being much more preferable, this could be a really fascinating one to watch, and one that I'm really keeping my eyes on. I sort of think that Viking Therapeutics will be bought out at some point, but they do seem to be moving on to phase 3 clinical trials on their own. So we'll see. We'll see. Their C-level folks have said some interesting things about how they manage, how they plan to manage the supply chain once this does get approved, and how they expect to bring it to market from a manufacturing standpoint. But that's for a different conversation. For purposes of this podcast, the interesting thing that happened in the last couple of weeks is we saw the COO and the CFO of Viking Therapeutics offload a ton of stocks. The COO offloaded about $22 million worth of their own stock, and then the CFO offloaded about 40% of his holdings, which is around $5 million. So you saw this happen. Apparently, this happens often with executive compensation. I have never had the pleasure of being on such a program, but essentially, what's happened is these sort of triggers are written into the contracts of these C-level people, where they hit a certain period of time and they vest, so to speak, and then the sales are the shares are sold. So this is not necessarily an indication of anything being afoot at Viking Therapeutics, even though on the surface it could seem that way. I think that this is a really interesting conversation to have right now, because I really do think that Viking Therapeutics, especially with their oral formulation of their GLP-1 GIP receptor agonist, is an absolute sleeper when it comes to changing the game for incretin mimetic therapies. I just think that an oral formulation that can offer similar weight loss results to something like tirzepatide could be an absolute game changer, and so much easier to manufacture. We talk so much about releasing the vials and what that would do for the supply chain here in this world, in this realm of GLP-1 medications. But if there were just oral formulations of all these, it could really change the game. Now, interestingly, in the past couple of weeks, I've been bombarded with ads on my social media feeds from basically online providers who are now writing prescriptions for compounded oral tirzepatide. So we've talked about how crazy it is that we're seeing compounded retatrutide, a molecule that hasn't even finished phase 3, just starting phase 3 clinical trials. That was wild enough, but now to see oral formulations of tirzepatide, it's the wild, wild west right now in the world of incretin mimetics, and interesting things to watch for sure. I'm always interested in the crazy things that you see. If you see crazy advertisements that you would like to share with me, you can send them to mounjaroman@gmail.com. I always enjoy seeing what other people are seeing out there in the wild. Thank you for being here this week on The Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave it a 5-star rating and review. I would love it if you would do that. Thank you to everyone else who has already done that or is doing it currently. Really appreciate you. Couldn't do it without you. Until next week, we'll see you on The Pen.